Hello and welcome to the Christmas special of the Doing the Rounds podcast with me, Josh Faulkner. My guest this week is Marty Jones. Whilst being one of the top wrestlers to come out of Britain, Marty took his talents all over the world to countries including Mexico, Japan and Canada. We'll be talking all things from Marty's beginnings, time spent with Andre the Giant, and some of his memorable matches, including the ones with the late rollerball Mark Rocco. Today, Marty finds himself working as a trainer that's assisted in training some of the top names in the world of professional wrestling, most notably head of WWE's talent recruitment, William Regal. 2020 has been a bad year, not just for the world, but for the British wrestling community, as we've lost much-loved personalities Rollerball Mark Rocco, Wayne Bridges, and most recently, Mal Mason. Due to the coronavirus pandemic, it's been 9 months for me since I last wrestled in front of a live audience. Here's hoping 2021 sees the return of crowds to wrestling shows so we can all go back to doing what we love. Here's also hoping that after some of the events of this year, the British wrestling community can come together and move forward positively. Just before we get into the interview with Marty Jones, as we record this episode, previous interviews with the likes of Mal Mason, John Fremantle and Mal Sanders are being uploaded to YouTube. So, if you like what we do over here, please give those a share. I'd love for the stories of my guests to go far and wide. Whilst we're on the subject, a shout out to Phil Powers for his hand in the production of this episode. So, sit back and relax as Marty Jones does the rounds with Josh Faulkner.
Beginnings, Marty. You mentioned you started wrestling at the age of 6, and from doing my research into these questions, that was amateur wrestling. Is that correct?
That's right, yeah.
And you started under Billy Robinson, who was a friend of your dad's. How did your dad know Billy Robinson?
Well, it all started, I was from a place called Failsworth, which is just on the outskirts of Manchester.
Yeah.
And Billy Robinson had a wrestling gym. Well, Billy Robinson is synonymous with being a right good wrestler, and, you know, my dad was in the building business, but it was my mother who had a hairdresser's shop. And about 2 miles down the road was another hairdressing shop that Billy Robinson's mother had. So the connection was the two women, my mother and Billy Robinson's mother, had hairdressing shops. And then my dad started doing a few jobs for Billy Robinson. And the problem with me, I had an accident when I was a kid, hence I wear glasses, and I'm actually blind in one eye. A lot of people don't know that. And I had this accident. And as kids are, getting bullied at school, specky, you know, the ones that have the plaster with the little hole in it on your lens so you can see out of it. Anyway, I couldn't keep my temper. And when they started taking the mickey out of me, I used to smack him up. And I wasn't the brightest spark at school, but I loved sports, and I was told to go to school. I never had a day off school. So my dad took me down to Billy Robinson's gym, basically to control my temper. And the rest is history. He taught me amateur wrestling, and I wrestled until I was 17. And I got into the Olympic squad, and I won the British title. Well, you appreciate, Josh, British amateur wrestling compared to world, you know, the Turks and the Russians. We don't stand a chance, but it would have been nice to have gone to the Munich Olympics.
So the Munich Olympics, Marty, being in 1972, and hearing the story before, for some reason they preferred to take the southern team of amateur wrestlers over the northern team. Is that correct?
Well, what happened? Billy Robinson, there was 11 weights. We was represented in 7 of the weights.
Right.
Which was phenomenal. And what happened, I mean, I can name them if you want, but Billy's club, because Billy Robinson was associated with professional wrestling, the amateur wrestling didn't like it. And there was 4 guys, one was from Sparta, one was from United, and you're right, there was 4 southern clubs. And they picked them 4 to go to the Olympics. one of the other 7 was invited to go. I was invited to go with Max Shatlady, who was the Olympic coach, to Lillisham Hall, where the England World Cup trained. That's where we did the training.
Right.
But to actually go, they wouldn't fund us. So my dad and Billy and a few others said, well, we'll fund them, and they wouldn't allow it. So that was when I decided to turn professional. Now, there's a myth that only you will know here, Josh, because I'm going to tell you, and anybody who's wrestling. All these people that say that Billy Robinson taught them professional wrestling, pardon me swearing, it annoys me, is a load of bollocks. Because Billy Robinson would not teach anybody the pro job. If you mention professional wrestling to Billy Robinson, he'd throw you out of the gym. But what he did do, when the greats came over, like Joseph Muller, George Gordienko, Joseph Mulder, and people like that came to work pro in this country, he used to get them in the gym, and we used to pull about with them, if you know what I mean. But it was strictly shoot and catch amateur wrestling. And then Billy Robinson, he was like an uncle to me. He took me then over to Billy Riley's place. And as you know, there's a bit of a clipping where there's me at Billy Riley's place. I don't know if you've ever seen it.
I don't think I have seen the snippet, but Billy Riley's place being the notorious Snake Pit Gym, is that correct?
That's the original Snake Pit. Everyone, Billy Joyce, Billy Robinson, Jack Dempsey, Jack Fallon, the list is endless, you know. And it was I was only 12 at the time. It was a privilege to go. But Billy had a lot of faith in me. Billy Robinson, like I say, never ever taught professional wrestling whatsoever. When all these people say they was taught by Billy Robinson, it's not true. They may have gone to a seminar for the catch wrestling, like Gentleman Jack and Shayna Baszler and people like that. And there's no harm in putting the amateur wrestling into the professional game.
Yeah.
You know, that's why I teach at the gym. But no, that's how I started anyway. Then the rest is, I got to work. Billy wasn't happy about that. Billy went on his tours to Japan, and when he found out I turned pro, he didn't speak to the family for a long, long time. But then he changed his tune, because I still see, in fact, he only rung me about an hour ago, Jackie Robinson, who was his cousin, you know.
Right.
Who was a pro. We all stick together. And then I started wrestling on the circuit for joint promotions, Martin Conroy. And I was only wrestling 12 months, and then I got an offer to go to Mexico, and then all the rest is history.
So before turning professional, Marty, did you watch much professional wrestling yourself?
Well, the answer to your question was, when I was amateur wrestling myself, the only time I went to watch it was when my dad took me to Bellevue to watch Billy Robinson. And Billy used to introduce me to the greats. But I always had it in my head that you had to be a good amateur before you could be a professional, you know what I mean?
Right. So when...
that was the only way you could get in the job, Josh, unless, you know, your family member was a... You couldn't just walk in a gym.
No.
You know, you had to... In them days, you know, it's not like now, I want to be a professional wrestler, yeah, give us your money and one time. If you're good, you're good. But in them days, I mean, I remember going to Japan and with Carl Gotch, I had some great teachers. And I went to the dojo there with Fujiwara and Fujinami. And they used to have Japanese guys there, and they used to draw around the feet. And they said, you go to the toilet now, and you can have a drink there, and you can stop. But you mustn't move off that spot. And you've got to do 1,000 squats. 1,000, not 10 or 100. 1,000. And I've seen people shaking and just pass out.
So you mentioned, Marty, your first glimpse of seeing professional wrestling was being taken to the shows with where Billy Robinson was wrestling. Who else would have been on these shows at that time?
Oh, you had people. I'm trying to add them with the modern guys, you know. There was people like Gwyn Davis, and there's people like the Zebra Kid, the Pye Brothers, Ian Campbell, all the Scottish lot, George Kidd, Johnny Saint, Roy and Tony St. Clair, Colin Johnson, all them guys, you know.
Your first step at the professional ladder, Marty, was at the Ryton Stadium in Bolton. Who would be promoting the shows there at this time?
Martin Conroy, which was Joint Promotions. Best Ryton Promotions, it was called. In them days, it was a syndicate. There was like 6 promoters that was made up Joint Promotions.
Yes.
Dale Martins was in London, Ralph Wisco and Green was in Leeds, and that type of thing, you know. Beresford and Morell. And a lot of these promoters, I mean, Les Kellet was and then he used to swap talent a little bit around, you know. You'd go down London for a week, and when me and Rocco hit the chemistry together, and then we was on TV type of thing, that's the match you wanted, so you'd go down London for a week.
I see.
But also the money at them, I mean, my first ever payday was £6, like when I was 17, 18. But if you was wrestling 5 times a week, 30 quid was a lot of money.
Of course.
But you had to do thousands and thousands of miles. There was no sense in it. You'd be at Aberdeen one night, and then you'd be in Plymouth the next night, and back up to Glasgow the next, and you had to drive all them ways. And obviously, I used to cart haystacks around with me because you live around here, and the Royal Brothers and people like that, Bert and Vic, you know.
One name I've heard you mention in a past interview, Marty, is Jackie Pallo. Would he have been working at this time?
Did I ever mention Jack Capello?
What was it about Jackie Pallo that you didn't like?
It was just attitude, and it's one of them, if you was on with somebody, and we knew at the time that Mick McManus carried him all the way through.
Right.
He just put himself on a pedestal as though, look who I am. And he went, and he couldn't wrestle to save toffee. He didn't like women wrestlers. He tried promoting and knackered that up. And if he was on with somebody who was like a little bit tasty, he'd tell the promoters he didn't want to work with them.
You made many TV appearances, Marty, part of ITV's coverage of British wrestling. When was your first televised match?
First match is actually on YouTube. It's a funny story. There's a guy called Dane Curtis, and he was from Rochdale. Well, I couldn't drive at the time, so I must have been about 18. And obviously, when I went to Ryton Stadium, that you mentioned in Bolton,
Yeah.
the ring was there permanent. So that's where me and Jackie Robinson, Colin Johnson, and Abe Ginsberg, and Alan Woods, and people like that, we used to train. But also, I went over to Ted Betley's place where Dynamite Kid trained, and Steve Wright and myself, you know.
Yes.
A few of the Wigan lads. So there wasn't many gyms, but I was fortunate to go to them because I was invited to go. And then the first time, my first pro match, I actually went with Jackie Robinson to Connors Quay. And I borrowed some gear because he was short, and I went on with a guy called Maurice Hunter. I only went to watch. So I worked that night, and then my second professional match, believe it or not, was with one of the greatest wrestlers ever. And he had me disappearing up my own arse and coming out to the side, and even where I'd been. And that was the great Tony Charles.
Right.
I mean, he was a grafter. And then my next one was on with Abe Ginsberg. But my first television, we went as subs. And in Rochdale, where this Dane Curtis was, he only lived about 2 miles from me. He drove and we went somewhere. I think that could have been Bolton. And we was on with the Danger Men, Colin Johnson, who I'd been training with, and Steve Haggerty, against the Rochdale Hornets, which was me and this Dane Curtis. And I must admit, now that I'm in the business, this Dane Curtis was okay, a plodder, if you know what I mean. But they kept whacking him about, and I kept doing the comebacks, and they made me look good against 2 really seasoned professionals. So that was my first ever. And believe it or not, Colin Johnson's always been a lifelong friend. He comes down to the gym every week now, even though he's had his bloody leg off. But the thing is, he gave me my first pro match on telly, and I gave him his last match on telly.
You mentioned there, Marty, about the first matches you had, and coming from the amateur ranks into the world of the professional rankings. What was your thoughts and feelings going into the first matches you had? Were you made to feel welcome in the changing rooms as they were at the time, or?
Well, they were wrestlers, weren't they? They defended the job. And I'm not knocking the business at the moment. I mean, the seconds couldn't even take the dressing gowns back in. It was all kayfabe, you know, and there was a lot of that hard men. I mean, Adrian Street and Abe Ginsberg, Billy Graham and Jackie Pallow. Like I say, you mentioned Pallow and McManus. They'd only have 4 matches on, 4 or 5. But every match was like the top of the bill with these household names, you know. And because I think I'd come from Billy Robinson's gym, I think they welcomed me with open arms, as though he'd come in the business right. It's like Rocco, he got in the business through Colin Joynson, because he was going to be an international horse rider, a showman on the horses. But Colin Joynson, he was like a family member. So they welcomed me in it. But my baptism at Brighton Stadium is a unique one if you've got time to listen, but I'll be very quickly.
Go for it. Love to hear it.
There was a 4-man tournament, and there was a team called the Undertakers that came in with masks on. There was the Saints, who at the time should have been Roy and Tony St. Clair, but Roy couldn't make it, so they put Johnny Saint in with Tony St. Clair. And the next team was the Black Diamonds, which was Pete Ginsberg and Eric Cutler. And the other team was Burt Royal and Vic Faulkner, the local favourites. Anyway, Burt Royal and Vic go on first against the Undertakers and beat them, and they're in the final. In the semi-final, the Black Diamonds, they cheat, and they hit Vic up the stomach while the ref wasn't looking. And as the ref goes down, they put the feet on the ropes and count 1, 2, 3.
Right.
So that meant the Saints were out, but the crowd weren't bothered because, they're on with Burt and Vic, the local favourites anyway.
Yes.
So the final was the Royals against the Diamonds. And lo and behold, the place was packed. And then all of a sudden, I'm stood at the back because I've just been introduced with my blazer on and a big Lancashire Bros on. And this is been training here, and he'll be on the show next. And he'd had a pro match. And I get introduced to the ring, and I bow, and I come back out. And I remember me and my dad were there. And you weren't allowed in the changing rooms at all. You know what I mean? It was just kayfabe. Then all of a sudden, the match is getting some good heat. Then all of a sudden, Ginsberg hits Vic Faulkner right up the bracket, bends down, the referee goes to count, and Ginsberg puts his feet on the rope and cheats again. But the favourites, the Royals, have been beat in their own town. And I'm telling you, a load of women got up and they dragged Eric Cutler off the apron, and as they took his feet from him, he split his head, his mouth, his chin on the ring. And his teeth came through his lip.
Oh dear.
Ginsberg goes down, pushes a woman. The next thing is 300 people fighting. And I just waded in, got in front of Ginsberg. But unfortunately, Ginsberg turned round because this kid had hit him with the top of the corner post. But as he hit him, unfortunately, the kid was a Down syndrome kid. Well, that made it worse, so we had a riot on our hands. And with that, I started fighting with Ginsberg, and I got him all the way back to the changing rooms. And I'd only met the fella once, you know, so that was a good baptism. The lads liked me after that. And that was a big, massive court case, but we got off it, and that's the main thing.
One name you haven't mentioned yet, Marty, amongst the names that would have been around at this time, is Les Kellet.
Yeah.
When did you meet Les for the first time?
You picked some names out for me. I picked Les Kellet up in Leeds. I was going to Whitby. And if you know Leeds, there's tunnels all the way underneath Leeds. And we broke down. And we broke down in the tunnel. I was only an apprentice for a Ford Cortina. And Les gets out, and what's it was with us, Jeff Kay, and he says, "Where are you going?" He said, "You're going to kill yourself." And Les Kellet was an old, rough, stone wall farmer, you know what I mean?
Yes.
He was one of them characters. Didn't say a lot, but he was a big name. And within 2 minutes, which is a long time, a car pulls over and puts Les in the car, recognised him. And Les went home. Anyway, we got the AA and got to Whitney in time, but that was the first time I met Les Kellet. Now, Les Kellet, he was an hard character. And he either did his stuff or he'd plough you into the ground, you know what I mean?
Yes.
Because in them days, you'd have 4 matches, and Cat Weasel or Les Kellet and people like that, Sally Oak, send them home happy. And then you'd have a top of the bill, and you'd have a comedy match on. Every match had some value to it, you know.
Definitely.
Yeah. And that, moving on rapidly, after I did all my tours to Japan and being with some great trainers and being Andre the Giant's tag partner, I learnt a lot, and I knew the business, knew to respect and not respect. And then the new era comes in. And if you look at NXT UK now, they're nearly there. They're depicting the old World of Sport type.
Yes.
Where there's 2 people having a fight. And it's coming across pretty good. For me, it is. There's just a lot of talent that's still got to be tried and tested, because I don't think they've got the best talent in the UK and especially in Europe. But that's down for them to get them, you know.
Of course. Earlier this year, Marty, we lost Rollerball Mark Rocco, one of your greatest rivals. The feud with Mark went all over the country. When did you first meet him?
There again, I think that was like 6 months into the business, because we came in similar time. And because he was from Bolton, and his dad, Jimmy Hussey, and then we started wrestling, and you tend to get that. And it's like when Finlay came along, and Murphy and Danny Boy Collins. There were some great guys at that time. And we all seemed to have a bit of chemistry. And we was all jealous of each other. Don't get it wrong. I mean, Rocco wasn't the best to work with. He'd boot you twice, and the third one, he'd put your teeth down the back of your throat. But he gave as good as he got. And he was different. He was a character, and we did have chemistry. And I mean, I look back at some of the injuries that he gave me and I gave him. I mean, talking about straight, putting stitches in each other's body. But I wouldn't swap it. What upset me about Mark is I didn't want to go and see him in this home. I wanted to go and see him, but people told me not to go and see him. Because, I'll give you a little clue. I own the Wrestlers Reunion in Manchester.
Right.
And I invited Mark and Anne over from Tenerife. And they came. And Mark wasn't well, you could see that.
Right.
And, Alzheimer's and dementia is very similar, but he wasn't well, but he still had his wits about him. And I just said, ladies and gentlemen, if we can just bury the hatchet for 5 minutes, because where we did it was the club where I drink, Working Men's Club.
Right.
And when you mention Rocco, a lot of people's eyes and ears popped up. I said, this guy, for me, was way ahead of his time. William Regal and a few other people say that me and Rocco revolutioned the game, and it was just something we was taught to do. We gave as good as we got, and there's just something just gelled there. I hated him, he hated me, and that's the way he liked it. He wanted everybody to know that we hated each other. But if we just bury the action for 5 minutes, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce Mark Rollerball Rocco to the stage, where I'd like to present him with the Hall of Fame, induct him into the Hall of Fame. Ladies and gentlemen, Rollerball Rocco. Well, he didn't stand up. So Annie's wife had to bring him to the stage. And she went and sat down. And on the table was his certificate. So I stood up and I just said, Rocco, this is for you. I want to induct you to the Hall of Fame. So he grabbed the mic off me, pretty tasty, you know.
Yeah.
And he had his back towards the audience. And I'm sat there, and he's saying, listen, you Jones. And I thought, okay, no. And I turned round, Mark, and as I touched him, he said, don't fucking touch me. Oh, I thought, hey, oh. And on the table was a pint pot that had pound coins in it, because we'd done the raffle.
Yeah.
I accept this, Jones. He said, well, don't lie, yeah, and I never will. He got the pint pot and threw it at me. I went and sat down.
Oh, God.
But that's the way he wanted it. Right to the end, me and him were enemies. And that's why when I went to Brian Dixon and a few of the boys, Steve Taylor, Colin Joyce and Jack Robinson used to go and see him. And Rollerball, bless him, he used to grab the lads. He didn't want them to go. Well, I know if I'd have gone, we'd probably end up fighting. Oh, you know what I mean? And that's why, you know, I do miss him terribly. And he did do well in Japan, and he's a true pro. And I mean, this week's been a sad week with Mal Mason going and Pat Patterson and people like that. But we're at that age, unfortunately, where I'm in the middle of the young ones, I'm in the middle of the old ones as well, you know. So this one, I sit here now with my flat and I'm thinking all these people, and here's me whinging about COVID and things like that. It could get a lot worse, but it's just one of them things. But wrestling, it's the greatest business in the world if it's run right and if it's done right. And that's what I try and do. In my eyes, I'm probably wrong. I don't like all these gymnastic shows where they're disappearing up their own arse. I know it probably gets the crowd going, but I do believe it's like fashion, our business, Josh. I believe it's coming back where two people are competing together, two athletes competing together. I mean, like I said before earlier, when we used to do 12 5-minute rounds, when I watched matches with Johnny Saint and Steve Gray, them guys, they still had the chemistry. Fit Finlay, Skull Murphy, all them guys, Ellen Workers, it was all characters. What do you weigh in at now, Josh, yourself?
The last time I weighed in, I was probably about 16 and a half stone.
Yeah, well, name me 10 wrestlers over 17 stone.
Naturally, it'll probably be hard to do so.
Yeah. Well, in our day, you know, Albert Rocky Wall and people, John Cox, people like that, Gwyn Davis, there were big mountains of men. Yeah. I mean, look at Big Daddy and Giant Haystacks. I mean, people call Big Daddy, take it from me, he used to pull about on the mats every Sunday morning. He used to be a lifeguard, he was fit as a fiddle. His brother made him into what he was, and he's put more asses on seats than anybody. So without him and Haystack, we probably wouldn't have got paid.
Going back quickly, Marty, to the matches with Mark, you mentioned William Regal has said that they're revolutionised wrestling, and those matches are spoken about and studied to this day. What was it, in your opinion, that made these matches so good?
I've been asked this a few times. It's like fashion, Josh. The miniskirts and the boob tops are coming back, aren't they?
Yeah.
It's like come all the way around again. But it's the way we was taught. It takes 2, sometimes 3 to tango in there. And it just happens. You know, when somebody kicks you in the chest, I mean, Finlay, he used to kick you in the back. And it's not the way you sold it. You had to sell it like that because you'd have your lace marks on the back of your back. In other words, it was like a semi-shoot all the time. Yeah. You know, and when people got slammed, they slammed them. They didn't. You've only got to watch the matches, Josh, you know what I mean? And the crowd, it was the cheapest form of entertainment. And it catered for the average living person. You know, the average working class person. I mean, to wrestle at Blackpool Tower and to wrestle at the Royal Albert Hall, to wrestle in Japan and Madison Square Garden and all these places is great. But it was only a lot of them, and 50% of them aren't wrestling fans. It's just that they're in the town and there's something on. At Royal Albert Hall, many times, you know, half of them would be just tourists, got in to watch something.
You mentioned there, Marty, some halls. You mentioned the Royal Albert Hall. You mentioned Blackpool Tower. When you were doing those 10 shows a week, what was your favourite hall to work in?
It was difficult because what would happen? When I said 10 shows a week, don't forget the camps were thrown in with that because we was learning then.
Yes.
But if you're talking about iconic halls, every town we must have wrestled in at some time.
Yeah.
Every little village. But the ones that stick in mind, obviously was Bellevue, iconic place, Leeds Town Hall, De Montfort Hall, Hanley was very good for me, Stoke-on-Trent.
Yes.
And then working with these people, you see, there's one thing that we're all missing here. If I was on with a good worker, say Finlay Rocco, I mean Pete Roberts and Terry Rudge, I was very fortunate. I am being a bit big-headed here. You get the big fat guys that run at Big Daddy and this, that and the other, and they know the rule. But I was very fortunate that I could wrestle with a wrestler. I could be a babyface and I could be a heel as well.
Yes.
And I always got credit, and where my fellow professionals said, hey, you made that kid look good. That was a great match with that lad you had. But when I came up against Pete Roberts and Tony Charles and all these unsung heroes like Pete Roberts, Thibaut Zakash, Steve Theodore, it was a night off. Colin Joynton for the size of him. So we used to just go in and wrestle. And then all of a sudden, we got the TV. And when they saw me and Rocco and me and Finlay knocking shit out of each other, that was our shop window. So they said, hey, you remember that match that we saw on World of Sport? Well, they're down the road this week. Shall we go and watch it? You know what I mean? I had a match with, and I'm not being big-headed, but these things, I can back it up. Ken Walton said to me, this is the best match I've ever commentated on it. And it was me against Owen Hart.
That was the match from Bradford. Is that right?
Correct.
Right.
And the story about that is I went over to wrestle for Stu Hart when Dynamite was there and John Foley. And I was there before Davey Boy Smith.
Right.
And Davey Boy Smith came in. So I was actually a bulldog before Davey Boy Smith with Dynamite. And there were great days then.
So I was going to move on to talking about the international tours of the various countries around the world you visited during your career, Marty. So starting off with Mexico, you mentioned you went to Mexico 6 months in. How did that come about for you?
Well, I went to Europe, and the Europe was you got people like Mil Mascaras, and you got people in them days that would come into England.
Yes.
And wrestle. And if you had a chance to go on the German tournaments, they were doing 10 days tours all the time. It was the in thing then. Anyway, I got a chance to go to Mexico through, I think, we see Mil Mascaras in Germany, but also they were looking for some talent as well. And because, this kid must be good because he's one of Billy Robinson's guys. It was like Billy Robinson being the mentor. Billy Robinson had no young wrestlers. It was just that it was well known that I turned pro from being at Billy Robinson's gym.
Yes.
And now me and Steve Wright started tagging together as the Wonder Boys, but Steve wouldn't go. Anyway, they said, if you pay your fare there, we'll pay your fare back. And I nearly fell for it. And my dad said, what happens if they don't give you any work and they just keep you on the sidelines and they never pay for your fare back? You're going to be homesick, you're going to come home. So we didn't do it. And then all of a sudden I said, I'll do it if you pay me fare there and back. And they did. I was supposed to go for 3 weeks, and he ended up being there for 3 months.
Following the next country you would wrestle in, Marty, is Canada, and obviously we had members of the Hart family coming to England, and as you mentioned earlier, you went out to Calgary. What was it like going out to Calgary? Did you get to go to the Hart Dungeon, as it's known?
Oh, yeah. We was at Stuart's house every Saturday morning. The thing is, he was on the loop. It was called, you went to Regina, Saskatoon, and Bret Hart, Keith Hart, Owen Hart, and all them guys, even Natalia and Davey Boy Smith. It was a hell of a team, and they had some great wrestlers that used to come in, Abdul the Butcher and Dory Funk and all these guys. And Calgary Stampede was always packed. It was great. It was a good experience. I was a young lad, and we had a bit of fun. Dynamite and everybody else, you know. We all got on well with each other. And it was good, Canada. I must admit, I've been very, very fortunate and very lucky. When I got off the plane at Mexico, I got in a taxi with no doors on it. And I thought, what the hell have I come to here? And the sanitation and the poverty was horrific. But once you knew what you had to do, and you did this, and I even saw people get shot. I saw loads of stories, but it was all part of growing up with the wrestling business.
Yes.
And I was thankful that I had the chance to see the world. And when I got a chance to go to Japan, I went to Japan about 6 times, and that was right up my street. They ran the business right. You know, they had they had a team like Andre the Giant and the European team and the American team against the Japanese team. You never even spoke. If you were seen speaking to one of the Japanese wrestlers, you got sacked. Simple as that. They kept the job straight. And if you hadn't watched their matches the night before, you wouldn't know what the eye spots were or what this, that and the other. And in that era, it was all kick and punch all the time, you know. And that's when your amateur experience came into it.
So you said 6 tours of Japan, Marty. How did the first one come about for you?
There again, you know, I was just asked to go. And I think it's with the publicity, with being Billy Robinson's guy, you know. And because they like amateur wrestling. And I'd obviously been talking to Carl Gotch, and Carl Gotch was there. So I went over there, and the rest is history. But that was right up my street. I felt a film star. We stopped at the Keo Plaza Hotel, and they flew me in. And I didn't even know what a jumbo jet was. And I got to Manchester Airport. I said, that's not going to get off the ground. And they said, well, I hope so. You were on it. I said, what you mean? It was like the debut flights.
Wow.
And I went first class. And them days, it was 22 hours flying to get to Japan.
Yeah.
Because you couldn't go across Russia. You had to go to the North Pole for 12 hours, get off, a couple of hours refuel, and back down the other side, you know.
One name you've mentioned about being within Japan, Marty, is Andre the Giant.
Yeah.
And now, there was... Andre came to Wigan early in his career to learn how to wrestle?
Yeah, well, I might be letting the cat out of the bag here. Frank Valvar, which was Andre's manager, he was getting on a bit in years, and Andre couldn't walk that well. Because of his knees, obviously, and this, that, and the other. And he needed somebody to go out with him at night time, because all the sponsors wanted Andre the Giant to go back to their karaoke bar or restaurant or hotel.
Yeah.
And Andre the Giant, when he was seen anywhere in the world, everybody, they all turned. He was the 8th wonder of the world.
Yeah.
Well, he was a god in Japan. And if I told you a little secret, he used to get $30,000 a week.
Wow.
All them years ago. He sold out wherever he went. But there's one thing that he liked. You can ask Tony St. Clair and all them guys. He always respected the British people. And when he was 18, the story goes, he came over to Wigan to learn wrestling.
Right.
And he was actually, he's French, obviously, and he actually was a rugby union player. He played rugby union for France as a kid. And he always respected the British wrestlers and anybody. So much so, he didn't get on that much with the American people early doors, wrestlers and that. And that's why I used to say the tales, we'd be here till next week, Josh, telling you the tales. But what a funny, funny man. I mean, when we ordered a taxi at 11 o'clock at night, there was punters still outside his room wanting autographs and things like that. And we had to get a Toyota Crown. A Mercedes or a minibus was too small because he had to get in the back of it. He couldn't sit in it. He had to lie down in the back.
Yeah.
And the stories about him drinking.
That's what I was going to ask next. I mean, you mentioned being out with him and it's legendary tales, but do you know firsthand how much he could drink?
I'm telling you, right, on my daughter's life this is, I've been with him. In his contract, he would have a plastic, nowadays they're metal, aren't they? But you know a plastic dustbin?
Yes.
He would have a dustbin on the bus.
Right.
Full of ice and litres of Sapporo beer.
Wow.
Going to the show, there'd be one in the dressing room and there was one on the way back. There was always beer there for him in the dressing room, and he used to get a load of sodas and Coca-Colas for the boys. But he used to just open one bottle, a litre bottle, and flip the top open with another bottle. And I've seen him, because I've started doing it, all this crap about that he drunk 57 litres. He used to drink at least 20 litres a day. 20 bottles of them beers is no problem whatsoever, depending on wherever the journey was, you know.
Yeah.
And I've been with him at 5 o'clock in the morning when he's been leaning on me. He had cowboy boots on, right? They were like size 17s. But because of the toe, he went like size 22s. And some of the tales, even if his family knew that obviously he's passed away, knew, they wouldn't believe it. I'm telling you, I was there. I was with him a hell of a lot. And it was an honour and a privilege to have been in his company.
I can imagine. You mentioned in a previous interview that Vince McMahon Sr. wanted you to go to America whilst you're in Japan.
Yeah.
And after seeing how successful Bret and Owen Hart would go on to be, and also Dynamite Kid and Davey Boy Smith, were you ever interested in a move to the WWF as it was at the time?
Well, as I said, what happened, and it's very ironic you should say this, when I was in Japan, the first ever WWF, not WWE, WWF tour went to Japan.
Right.
And they asked me to stop on, only because I was, how can I put it? I was bottom of the bill material who'd worked with a lot of these young Japanese guys. And they asked Andre to stop on. Well, the rest of the bill at the time was Bob Backlund, who was a good wrestler, Dean Malenko, Nikolai Volkov, Tony Gurria, and a guy called Chief J. Strongbow.
Yeah.
And they didn't know how the Japanese people would react to Chief J. Strongbow because it was more of a gimmick.
Yeah.
And they didn't know how it would react because I'm telling you, a lot of them matches were like a semi-shoot. And I'll tell you, I haven't got time to tell you, but the funny tale was Chief J. Strongbow was the first on.
Right.
And can you imagine his match when you're not allowed to talk to his opponent?
Yeah.
He threw one chop. When he came out, the crowd went berserk, seeing this guy come out with a massive veil of an headdress. Do the Indian dance.
Yeah.
They went potty. And when the young Japanese lad came in, the first thing he ran around, he did his war dance round the ring, and then he chopped the Japanese kid. And the Japanese kid didn't sell it, and he chopped him twice as hard and caught him on his Adam's apple.
Oof.
Chief J. Strongbow got out the ring, back to the changing rooms, got his gear, and went to the hotel. He said, I don't get enough fucking money for that shit. And he never fucking wrestled again. He went home. Because they, you know, at that time, the American wrestling was all, how can we put it, as it is now, flamboyant, but it was more of a gimmick type of wrestling. And all these wrestlers at my time was thinking that American wrestling was a load of shit. But it was Vince McMahon Sr. that asked me, and it's ironic, Pat Patterson was the manager of the American tour.
Right.
And Pat Patterson asked me, he would put a word in for me to go to America. And, you know, I'd been to Mexico and I'd been here, I'd been there.
Yes.
And I thought to myself, I need to go home. I was getting a bit homesick. So I refused the offer to go to America by Vince McMahon Sr. And yes, it is probably one of the big regrets of my life, but, you know, that's one of the things at the time, it just wasn't right.
Did the door ever open there in the future for you, Marty? So you had, obviously, Brett and Davey Boy at SummerSlam 92 at Wembley Stadium. So around this time, was there ever any offers there for you, or?
No, not really, because the American scene, they was like getting all the companies, and I was happy what I was doing, to be honest with you. I mean, I don't want to dwell on the fact, I love me wrestling, I always have done. But unfortunately, my wife died when she was 40 years of age.
Right.
And not a lot of people know this. When you're wrestling up and down the road and trying to hold a job as well, I've always had a job, but I've always lost my job because, you know, I did window cleaning, I worked at the meat market. It was always jobs that, you know, you needed to support your family to tie in with wrestling. I've always worked. And then a tour had come along, and because wrestling was my first passion, you'd lose your job. I was even a driving instructor, window cleaner. The meat market job was good for me.
That question there was SummerSlam 92, so that was about 4 years after ITV's coverage of wrestling stopped in 1988.
Yeah.
And around this time, what happened to your wrestling career now that televised wrestling had stopped in Britain?
Well, it seemed to go quite well because the people weren't watching it on telly. So they came out to the halls a little bit. And so it was only the established wrestlers that were doing okay. I felt sorry for new wrestlers that didn't get the expose. And at that particular time, a lot of promoters then started their own promotions.
Right.
Because they didn't need the television then, you see.
Yeah.
Now, whether that was a good thing or a bad thing, but, you know, a lot of people started popping up at little clubs and putting shows on and using shit talent, if you know what I mean, but it seemed to work. I think it went down on a bit of a decline, but a lot of new faces have cropped up.
Yes.
But wrestling will always be wrestling, you know. I mean, we had the expose job, didn't we, when Jackie Pallo and all that crowd, he went to the newspapers and all this crap, where we had the big expose in the papers, and that's one of the reasons why I didn't like Pallo.
Was that when his book came out, You Grunt, I'll
Yeah,
Grunt?
it came out. They're all under his bed holding him up, you know, and his son was a clown as well, you know what I mean? So,
one name that hasn't come up so far, Marty, is Kendo Nagasaki, and I was reading his book recently, and there was an incident mentioned in the book about a television show for Granada that saw Kendo Nagasaki going on trial.
yes, I was involved with that.
What's your take on events there?
Well, I was there. And basically what happened, we got an offer from, it was called Up Front, with a guy called Tony Wilson.
Right.
And Judy Maycock. And Tony Wilson was the guy who had the Hacienda Club in Manchester, and he was also a pop guru, and he was a big name. He was like Piers Morgan at the time.
Okay.
Anyway, for Granada Studios, and they asked me would I come, and they're doing an interview on wrestling. So naturally, he said, we'll pay you. So I said, yeah. So I went down, and when I got there, Granada Studios, who should be there but Pat Roach in a nice white suit.
Right.
And then Mick McManus was there, all dolled up. Now, he'd asked me to come in my wrestling gear. So I went with a tracksuit on.
Yeah.
The next thing is, I look on this set, and I can see a load of mats on the floor.
Right.
Well, I'm not the brightest spark in the world or the sharpest knife in the drawer, but I'm thinking wrestling gear, mats on the floor. So we go in the green room, and this Tony Wilson comes in. He says, what we do series about 5 or 6 programs. And just before you go on, and it's me, Pat, and Mick. Yeah, that sounds good, me, Pat, and Mick. Anyway, there's myself, Mick McManus, and Pat Roach.
Right.
Then who should appear, gives us a little wave, all with his makeup on, Blondie Barrett.
Right.
But he doesn't come into the green room. So this is the plot. Before we go out, they talk about, there was this painting on the floor, and they got a clown, and there's a load of paint on the floor, and he goes around on his bike. Then the bird comes in a bikini, and she slides up and down it with her boobs all over her ass. And then this painting was hung up in the Tate gallery.
Right.
And they show it previously, and some Japanese guy had bought it for 30,000 quid because it was just in the Tate gallery.
Yeah.
So then they came to us, and Tony Wilson said, now listen, if I step in the way, don't forget to give me a crack, and I'll pretend to fall on the floor. So Pat Roach says, who's going to crack you? He said, because if I crack you, you won't get up. Because we're defending the job, aren't we? And Mick says, well, I'm the same. And I've just said, well, I've no cause to crack you, but don't get involved. I said, I'm going to get involved with who? Oh, we've got the Olympic amateur team coming in.
Ah.
I said, oh, yeah. So you want me to go? I said, I'll tell you now, I won't be going on with them. The simple reason being, it won't be good viewing. And then Pat Roach and Mick McManus said, can I just tell you something? The professional wrestlers each year donate a lot of money to the Olympic Foundation, which they did.
Oh, I never knew that.
Wisco. They used to donate some money to them, right? Because Bert Jacobs, who was one of the big gurus, he used to wrestle it. Even though he didn't like it, he used to put a mask on and wrestle at some show there.
Ah.
Anyway, that's beside the point. The plot is, he's going to ask, and they wanted me there because I'd come through the schoolboy ranks or such a thing.
Yeah.
Pat Roach on Old Vida St. Pet, Mick McManus, one of the biggest names, and then they was going to bring Blondie Barrett, who was going to be the manager, not Gorgeous George, of Nagasaki.
Right.
And that's the punchline. So then, Blondie Barrett, I meet him in the toilets, and he says, Nagasaki said, if he goes down on his knees, rip the mask off. And I'm thinking, this is a bit unusual for... Oh, anyway, we're talking away, we take it by ear, then this Judy Mycock says, and what do you think? Oh, they said, they talk about Mick McManus's career, talk about Pat Roach, because he was the last one to say wrestling's finishing on TV.
Right.
Next thing is, everything's going well. Marty, you was a schoolboy champion. I said, yeah, that's fine. What made you come into professional wrestling? Well, I got bullied at school and this, and I believe you're the British champion at the moment. I said, yeah. He says, well, how do you feel about all these gimmick men? Because these lads on the front row, they're training 7 nights a week, and they don't get the recognition you're getting. So you're going off on a tangent. It's like amateur boxing and professional boxing. So then, He says, what do you think about this guy? And a smoke comes up. Out comes Blondie Barrett, and out comes Nagasaki.
Yeah.
I said, what do I think of him? I said, well, he's one of the biggest names in the business because he's different. He walks around with the mask on all the time. I said, but if you're talking about him in front of him, I said, he's just a pudding, him. You know. So then Nagasaki, a moody fight, whoa. So I boots him to the stomach. He goes down on his knees. I rip the mask off. And as I rip the mask off, they catch it just for a second. But Blondie covers him up with his gown. And he runs out.
Yeah.
But as he runs out, and you will know, with your profession, once you go off the set and go down like a tunnel, it's pitch black.
Yes.
And there was an artist, a makeup artist stood there.
Right.
And he hit her. And she fell over a big metal box, a makeup box.
Ah.
And she had been there for 50 odd years. And she ended up, or Granada ended up, trying to sue Nagasaki for £1 million.
So, Marty, when was your last match?
I'm going to say I haven't had it yet.
Oh, really?
No, I just want to get this ankle right, and I want to do 5 more matches. I want to go to my hometown in Oldham. I want to go to Handley. I want to go do one at, say, Croydon or whatever. I think I've still got a bit to offer, but my last match, you know something, I don't know. I honestly don't know.
So when you say you're looking to do something, I mean, I speak, I'm sure on many saying seeing you back in the ring would be something. Hanley and Croydon are promoted towns run by Brian Dixon. So would it be under Brian's All-Star banner, or is there other promotions you'd like to work for?
Yeah, Brian's okay with me. I get on well with Brian.
And who are some of the names that you may have seen out there that you'd like to be in the ring with?
Anybody, to be honest, because I respect anybody who puts a pair of boots on, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, the ideal match for me would be anybody's NXT. I mean, I'm waiting to watch Saxon Huxley now. He's one of our guys, and Ridge Holland and all them guys. I wouldn't even mind a match with Johnny Moss, to be honest.
Speaking of those guys, Marty, Ridge Holland, Saxon Huxley, you train, and you have trained for quite a while, many wrestlers. You're most known for training William Regal. And what's the one bit of advice you pass on to those that come to train with you?
Treat the job with respect. Treat people that's in it with respect. And you only get out of it what you put in. And only believe what you see, not what you hear. And it's not going to come to you. You've got to go to it. I recommend you go to as many seminars as you can. You learn what you can. And don't treat it as a joke. And lately I've just been saying, look, when you go to a wrestling school, make sure the person who runs it's got some credibility.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And just respect the business and respect those that are in it. Because there's a role in this business. You can be the best looking guy or girl in the world. You can be the best physique shape. You can be fat. You can be ugly. There's a role for everybody.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And just treat it as it is. I mean, I always ask myself the question. I do a few trainee matches sometimes, and they don't get paid because they're not fully professional. But it's all part of learning, getting used to that crowd.
Yeah.
You know, because the psychology is a big thing. Well, they're only trainee shows. And I get pleasure from seeing people having a passion for what they want to do.
Yeah, definitely.
But I also try and teach them the correct way, that if there's somebody trying to take a liberty with them, they know what to do as well. I mean, I'm not being big-headed away, but I look for these NXT guys, and there's Saxon Huxley, Ridge Holland, and there's Sam Gradwell, Amir Jordan, and all these people, right? They've all been through my gym at one time.
Yeah.
And if they've picked something up, just one move, and you know, I tell them all now, just think of something different. Try and be different. If you don't look, if you're not an Andre the Giant, that rings your showcase. You know, you've got to come over.
Of course.
Try and be different. But some right good lads out there and good girls. Some of the girls are better than the guys.
Yeah. Very true.
You know? But like Regal tell you, just respect the people that are teaching you, put things into practice. And the good thing for me, I'm going back to the World of Sport days because, as I said before, it's like fashion. And it's coming back. An Irish whip, a snapmare. You know, and another thing, and I'm not being disrespectful to these American wrestlers, there's a lot of them American wrestlers can't do the British style.
Yeah.
Because they're used to their style. And I know for a fact at the Performance Centre, they show a lot of World of Sport matches. They show Maya Rocco's matches. They'll show Big Daddy Haystack's matches.
Yeah.
Because we revel out, and it's all coming back. Well, I hope it is after this pandemic job, you know.
Definitely. Following on from that, Marty, what's your take on the British wrestling scene that you've seen? Obviously, not so much lately as there's been nothing really happening, but I'd say the last couple of years.
Well, it's a bit of a sad place sometimes. It's not what's happening in the ring. It's happening what's happening outside, down that road, to be honest, Josh, because it's just life. But we're in a pandemic now, and I can't understand. You know, elite athletes can train.
Yeah.
You know, I understand what's trying to happen. But years gone by, we used to eat worms and play about and not wash your hands and go out to all these third world countries and all this. And, you know, when you wrestled in Zimbabwe, you slept in a tent in a field as the hotel, you know, and things like that. And it's just, I don't know, it's just a big question mark about the business. But what I do like is switching the telly on and watching two athletes competing in wrestling, entertaining them. I hate all this where they're slapping the legs and all this. I'm not that stupid.
Yeah.
But body tackles and stuff like that, big slams, big backdrops, you know. And I wish the referees would be more efficient. Where nowadays, they used to count you, didn't they? 1, 2.
The standing 10 count, yeah.
You know what I mean? You could have a rest while you were down there.
Yeah.
But some referees just come and stand in the corner, and every count is 2.5. Why don't they kick out on half? Why don't they, you know, submission wrestling, things like that? But that's only me because I was brought up that way. Don't get me wrong.
No,
I mean, there's a match I'm going to try and watch tonight.
Carrera, before we wrap it up, is there anything you want to promote your training school or where people can find you?
No, all I'd like to say, if there's any up and coming wrestlers there, you know, I mean, I'm getting a few of the guys from the amateur gym coming through. I'm getting some good girls coming through. The thing is, you know, you only get out of life what you put into it.
Yeah.
Go to a proper, reputable gym, wherever it is. Get to as many seminars as you can, you know, and get taught the right way. And put back into it what you put, you know, you get out of it. Try and be different in your work. But the main thing, in this day and age, I think they've got it easy. They haven't got to go to Scotland tomorrow and then drive all the way down to London the next day, then over to Ireland and this, that and the other.
Yeah.
It's there on a plate if you're good enough. And it happens in every job. If your face fits and you're in and somebody likes you, but grasp it with both hands. And honestly, it's a great, great business to be in. Especially in my day where you can travel to your Canadas and all that. I mean, I look back sometimes. The school asked me to go back a few months back.
Right.
And I was made to go to school. I enjoyed school. But I used to get sent out of the class on purpose so I could go and watch the sport. I was a sport mad.
Yeah.
I did all the sports. And then the year when they said, what do you want to do when you leave school? There was about 30 in my class. And I always came out 26th. I weren't bad at maths, but I could do it if I wanted to. I said to the PE teacher, I want to be a sports teacher. He said, well, you'll pass. But unfortunately, you've got to learn maths and English and geography and English and history.
Yeah.
That year, I really, really tried, and I came third in the class. He got me in front of the headmaster, and he accused me of cheating.
Wow.
Because the previous 11 years, I'd come 26th. So, the PE teacher told me to go in the army. I'll go in the police force. And I passed for the police force, believe it or not.
That Manchester
But I went
Police.
to the medical, and because I was blind in one eye, they failed me. And the daft question was, what happens if somebody's going to pick a fight with you? I thought, hang on, that's a bit ironic when I'm a wrestler. You know what I mean?
Of course.
But I have enjoyed every minute of being a wrestler. I'm enjoying coaching, and I enjoy anybody to come down. The only regret I've got, and it's a personal one, I've got one or two friends in the business. I've got a lot of hangers on. And this year, with the pandemic, with my injury, and there's one or two people that if I can ask them why, but I'm not going to do, why they don't speak or they fell out with me, I don't know what it is, jealousy or whatever, unless we're all getting a bit old. But when you think about people like Pat Patterson, Rollerball Rocco, Mal Mason, a lot of these guys that I was fortunate to take advice off and learn off, and unfortunately they've passed away. I know it's life, but I'm still here, and I just want to enjoy, you know, when this pandemic finishes, still want to keep teaching. I still want to run a few shows. And more than that, I want to get back to Australia and see me grandson that I've not seen, and just live life if I can.
Of course.
And if there's any obstacles in the way, you know, just try and think about it instead of rushing into it like I used to do it. I've got to watch my tongue nowadays because I say things I don't mean to say. Things that when I was a young kid was a compliment, but nowadays it's not a compliment. You can either say something right or racist or whatever, so I'm on a learning curve. But as long as I keep seeing these odd one or two, I mean, my ambition was to go, I mean, I've been to the Performance Centre in America, I've been to Australia, I've been to America doing my seminars. I hope to do one more tour like that in America, but I would like to go to the Performance Centre in England for a week, that's all.
Yeah.
And pass a bit of my knowledge on, or talk about things and be part of it. That's all it is. That's one wish before I went, you know.
Of course.
But also people like you that are coming on and doing it the right way, instead of these so-called punchers all of a sudden do a few podcasts and then they try to make some money out of it, you know, and they're not fit enough to lace your boots up. They've never been in a ring.
I appreciate that, Marty. Thank you very much.
Not a problem at all.
And once again, Marty, thanks for taking the time to come and answer the questions.
And remember this, only believe what you see, not what you hear, and no pain, no gain.
Definitely.
All the best to you anyway.
Cheers, Marty. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you once again to Marty Jones for taking the time to come and share stories from his time in the wrestling business. Just before we go, here's wishing you, the listeners, a very Merry Christmas. Stay safe, and hopefully we'll be back soon doing the rounds once again with me, Josh Faulkner.